Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio appears to backtrack on President Trump's plan, announced earlier in the week, to move Palestinians out of Gaza and resettle them in other countries. Rubio now says any transfer of Gazans would be temporary. The Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz orders the army to prepare for what he called voluntary departures from Gaza. Katz says that they can go to any country willing to accept them. As the White House attempts to clarify what President Trump's Gaza proposal really meant, we're going to be speaking to one person who knows all about his communication style. I'll be speaking to Mercedes Schlapp, who was his Director of Strategic Communications during the Trump first presidency. And it's been announced that the funeral of the Aga Khan is going to be held in Lisbon on Saturday. He died on Tuesday at the age of 88. Coming up, we'll be speaking to Britain's Lord Sarfaz, who's paid tribute to him, calling him a hero. Hello and welcome to the programme. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated earlier on today that Gaza's citizens should be temporarily relocated while the Gaza Strip is being rebuilt. He made those remarks at a press conference in Guatemala City. And these comments follow on from the President Donald Trump's suggestion that the US take over the enclave. President Trump said it would be rebuilt and potentially turned into what he described as the Riviera of the Middle East. Well, Marco Rubio praised Donald Trump's suggestion as a unique and generous offer.
What President Trump announced yesterday is the offer, the willingness of the United States to become responsible for the reconstruction of that area. And while you are rebuilding, while you're clearing debris, by the way, there are unexploded munitions, there are all kinds of Hamas weaponry still buried underground. For people to be able to live in a place safely, all of that has to be removed. And the only thing President Trump has done very generously, in my view, is offer the United States willingness to step in, clear the debris, clean the place up. And in the meantime, the people living there will not be able, the people who call that home will not be able to live there while you have crews coming in. So in the interim, obviously, people are going to have to live somewhere while you're rebuilding it. It is akin to a natural disaster.
Well, for more, we can speak now to Manuel Hassassian, who is the Palestinian ambassador to Denmark and the former Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Ambassador. Earlier on this week, the US President Donald Trump said the US would, quote, take over and own the Gaza Strip. It sounds a little bit like the White House is backtracking on that. How does it sound to you?
Well, actually, you know, such a statement is ludicrous, because President Trump knows very well that the previous administrations have accepted the two-state solution, including Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And here he comes with a crazy proposal of trying to occupy Gaza and turning it into another Singapore and what have you. So the forcing of Palestinians out of their territory, in my opinion, could destabilize the entire Middle East region. He is asking for escalation of conflict. And of course, you know, such an act will basically mobilize also the entire Arab world, let alone the Islamic world. The Europeans have expressed their dissatisfaction with such a proposal because they still stick to their guns on the question of a two-state solution. So there is no acceptance by this proposal, except the far right wing of Israeli government, that of course it suits them to see Gaza without the Gazans, without the Palestinians, let alone that they would like also to see the Palestinians leaving the West Bank. So the immediate reaction of the Palestinians, especially the people who were interviewed in Gaza, that they are not going to go anywhere. Why should they leave their land? And if he wants basically to make them live in peace, let him end the occupation, Israeli occupation, President Trump, and let him stick to the international law and international legitimacy to have a conflict resolution to this epistemic community conflict, which is a protracted conflict that has been going on for almost 70 years. So his statement was very stunning, also to Jordan and to Egypt, who adamantly and categorically rejected such a proposal because that will put them in a very critical situation, let alone that they have been part and parcel of the Arab initiative, supporting a two-state solution and having an independent Palestinian state that would secure stability and peace in the Middle East. So here he comes with such a baffling remark that shook the entire world. And he thinks that he is dealing, with people as if it is a business deal.
Sure.
And this is not acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, what the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is now saying, it sounds a bit different from what we heard on Tuesday night, doesn't it? He said this wasn't meant to be a hostile idea, he says. And he says the transfer of people from Gaza would only be temporary. Do you think people would believe that?
No, it was the same story in 1948, where the Palestinians thought 750,000 were diasporas, thought that it was temporary, and they held their keys and left. And since 1948, a single human being came back to their own original homes. So what he is saying, he is trying to put some cosmetics on an improvised, I would say, non-calculative type of a statement that President Trump, and now they are trying basically to justify it in a positive manner. But the intention is very clear. They want to deport 2.2 million Palestinians living in Gaza, flattening Gaza, using Gaza for their own national interests when it comes to gas and oil. And flattening Gaza will basically, as far as Gaza is concerned, will secure its borders, and it will reap the benefit of the gas and oil with the United States, let alone believing that they will create summer resorts and what have you, will pay dividends. As he said, it will be the Riviera of the Middle East. I mean, this is something that is unbelievable. You cannot expect a president of the United States to be so naive in dealing with international politics and in a conflict that so many administrations try to, come with a resolution to this conflict, and they did not succeed because of the pressures of the Zionist lobby. But this guy comes and says to Israel, you stand aside, I will take care of business for you.
Yeah, but you have to hand it to President Trump. He has at least put this issue in the news cycle. It is the top story on news channels all over the world. Everyone is talking about it. He's certainly got the debate fired up. And some might say that there is some method in what he's done in creating some chaos, but out of the chaos might come some order. What do you make of all of this? How do you interpret these actions? Do you think there is a strategy here?
I don't think there is a strategy. This is what I call an improvised statement, and it was received like a nightmare for Egypt and Jordan, and a dream for Israel far-right government. And the other thing is that such a statement, he should have thought that the proposal risks undermining the ceasefire in Gaza and the continued release of hostages. So there are negative repercussions for such a statement, and it's not like a fine and dandy statement where he thinks that he could resolve the Palestinian issue by diasporizing the people from their own territory and land. No single Palestinian would accept that. No single Palestinian, no leadership would accept that. President Abbas will never accept this proposal. Neither the adjacent countries like Egypt and Jordan, and on top Saudi Arabia made it very clear. No normalization, no relationship with Israel without an independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. Time and again, the Saudis have put this on the table, and it seems Trump that by bullying, these Arab countries, because basically they, especially Egypt and Jordan, they get U.S. aid money, and by trying more or less to extort them into accepting, the influx of refugees coming from Gaza, let alone in the very near future, he would also try to push Palestinians from the West Bank. And this way, as he started calling the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. So he assumes that the biblical prophecy is on the side of Israel, and these are Israeli. I mean, this is Jewish land, and it's not, for the Palestinians. He is not saying that, but the implication of it is very obvious for this president, that he is totally biased, against the Palestinians and totally with Netanyahu. And I don't know. Birds of a feather flock together, it seems.
Yeah, and speaking of birds of a feather flocking together, he slightly underestimated the Arab governments and world leaders out there who've all come out and condemned this plan. They are, aren't they, completely resolute. There are no cracks whatsoever in the resolve of the Arab nations, the Arab League, with regards to future statehood for Gaza, for the Palestinians.
Well, actually, yes. There is a total resolution on this issue. Arab countries all cannot afford any kind of a political suicide in accepting such a proposal. Secondly, we have the European stand is very clear. France, Ireland, and what have you, they have been very clear on their stand for a two-state solution. And they think, such a solution will escalate conflict, and it will really destabilize the Middle East for time immemorial. Let alone, we have seen statements coming from the Chinese Foreign Office and what have you, condemning such an act. So the Global South, let alone the North, are in total coordination, basically, to the rejection of such a proposal. So there is no international consensus on this issue, and he is just trying to flex muscles.
Yeah, the United States and Israel look pretty isolated on the international stage with regards to this particular issue, because every other country seems to be saying pretty much the same thing. Quite interesting to see what the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, had to say. He says he's vowing to definitively bury the idea of a Palestinian state. There might be some people out there that wonder whether many in the Israeli government were ever at all serious about the idea of a two-state solution.
Well, let me tell you, there is a silent majority in Israel that accepts the two-state solution because they understand that they cannot but coexist with the Palestinians, because they cannot continue with this mentality, siege mentality, and with the psychological pressure that there is always a threat from the Arab world, the Islamic world, let alone the Palestinians, to their security and existence. There is, I could say on the side of the academics, let alone, some organizations like also Peace Now, it's becoming more active, One Voice. They all believe that the only solution is a two-state solution. And really, the two-state solution for the Palestinians has been a historic compromise. They have accepted 22% of historic Palestine, while, recognizing by de jure Israel over 78%. So where is the loss for Israel? Israel will be in a win-win situation if the Palestinians exercise their self-determination and have their state and secure their boundaries with the Arab world, with the Islamic world, let alone with their neighbors, the Palestinians. Economy will boom, open tariff system like NAFTA will take place, So what do they lose if they go ahead and implement the two-state solution? But they lose a lot if they don't, and they know that the consequences will be very grave in the near future, because the balance of power is not going to be on the side of America and Israel. And I'm not talking about the short term, but I'm talking about the long term. 20 years down the pipeline, I would perceive a different Middle East.
So you're saying history won't look back kindly on this chapter. Just want to pick up on what the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has been saying. He says that the voluntary departures from the Gaza Strip can now begin. What's your impression of what sort of an uptake they're likely to have for these so-called voluntary departures? How many people living in Gaza, admittedly many of them have gone back to homes that are in ruins, they've been dreaming of going back to their homes, they've got back, they've found they've been destroyed, entire communities have been destroyed. Are there people in Gaza who are saying, right, it's time to leave, let's go, anywhere will be better than living in a bombed out house?
To my knowledge, I don't think any of them would entertain the idea of leaving. Now, there are certain situations where many sick people, many injured people, they might cross the borders of Rafah to go and get physical treatment. That's the only intention. But I don't think anybody would leave their home and go and live in Egypt or basically in Jordan. So that's why it's a remote idea that Palestinians voluntarily would leave Gaza in order to seek a better future. I think their future is tied with the land. They are committed to their land. They don't want to repeat the Nakba of 1948. And that's why, they are clinging to their land as it is their only hope for survival in the future. And they know for a fact that Gaza will be reconstructed, that life will be normal, maybe not very soon, but in the very near future. So they're not going to take the risk of diasporizing themselves voluntarily unless Israel will inflict a mass exodus on the Palestinians in Gaza to forcefully diasporize them. That's a different story.
And just lastly, I mean, after 15 months or more than 15 months of warfare in Gaza, clearly the average person in Gaza isn't going to like, as you've been saying, these ideas that they could be voluntarily relocated to other countries that have already said they don't want to have them. But what do you think people's attitudes in Gaza are to Hamas now after they've endured immense suffering? All the blame has been pinned on Hamas by Israel, the United States and other countries for why this war happened in the first place, which, let's not forget, was the result of horrific events on the 7th of October 2023. What does the average person in Gaza think of Hamas now?
I think basically, I don't have statistics, unfortunately. And being an academic, I could not just make, statements without, justifying them with numbers. But I think there is a mixed emotions. Well, some of them who are committed to Hamas ideologically, of course, they will say that they have won and they have released thousands of Palestinian prisoners and now there is a ceasefire, the war stopped and what have you. They consider these as being, elements of victory for Hamas. But there is also, a wide majority of Fatah and whatever who live in Gaza. They have a different perspective that, this war brought destruction, decimation of the entire Palestinians in Gaza. And the rubbles and the ruins are a good testimony for the destruction of Gaza. And they believe, the only way out is basically to let the Palestinian Authority come back and take over Gaza administratively and economically and try to rebuild Gaza. So I would say there is a mixed emotion, but I would tilt it basically to a majority opinion that they believe that this war brought destruction and nothing came out of it except, helplessness, hopelessness, and pure destruction, living under dire conditions. It left scars on them rather than triumph or victory as others, would think so.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Always great speaking to you, Ambassador Manuel Hassassian. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Well, in line with President Trump's Gaza plan, Israel has ordered its military to prepare for what it has described as the voluntary relocation of Palestinians from Gaza. That's assuming that any of them want to leave their homes. Well, the military is making arrangements to facilitate the emigration of large numbers of Palestinians through land crossings, as well as special provisions for exit by sea and air. This is all according to the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz. Well, the country has not commented on actions to be taken if Palestinians refuse to leave, but has suggested that Ireland should accept Palestinian refugees. Well, Ireland was quick to respond, rejecting the suggestion, calling it unhelpful and a distraction. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Pat Leahy, political editor of the Irish Times. Thank you very much for joining us on Al Arabiya News. Why is it that this issue of the plight of the Palestinians is one that seems to have captured so much attention in Ireland and seems to be so close to the hearts of so many people there? What is it about this issue?
I mean, I think there's a there's a couple of reasons. I think one is that Irish people pay attention to what's happening in the world, and have tended to, as a country that was previously colonized themselves, tend to have a sort of emotional and instinctive connection with other peoples around the world who have had a similar experience. And as well as that, I suppose, there were links between the Republican movement here, Sinn Féin, and the IRA. And the IRA is no longer around in any meaningful sense, but Sinn Féin is one of the main political parties here, and they would have had links with the PLO and other Palestinian organizations going back a long time. And they would have all seen themselves, I suppose, as, sort of movements for national liberation. Sinn Féin and the IRA also had very strong links with militants in the Basque country, for example, and also with the ANC in South Africa. So there's sort of that connection, I think, which has deep roots going back several decades. And I suppose another reason may be that there was never a significant Jewish community in Ireland. There's a small Jewish community in Ireland and has been for a long time, but it is not terribly numerous and never played a significant role in our politics here in the way that you might have seen in places like the EU and the UK. So there's never one simple answer to these sort of questions, I suppose. There's always a number of streams running into it.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sinn Féin, and we've heard from the Sinn Féin leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, saying it is the desire of the Irish people to be on the right side of history. Obviously, that's in reference to what's happening in Gaza. I mean, is that opinion, and are these opinions shared right across the political spectrum in Ireland, or does it depend really from one area to another, or one political allegiance to another?
I mean, yes and no, I suppose, is the answer to that. By and large, they're shared across the political spectrum, though they are held with varying degrees of intensity, as you'll appreciate. So one of the questions that the newly reformed government here, we had a general election here at the end of November, and a new government, which is largely the same as the previous government, has been formed. Sinn Féin remain the leaders of the opposition, but one of the questions faced by that government will be whether to implement legislation which would ban the import of goods and services from the occupied territories in Palestine. Now, that is something that the previous government committed to doing. The two main parties that make up that government committed to doing in the course of the election campaign. In fact, all parties are committed to doing it. But I think within government, there are some people now having second thoughts about that, because even the previous American administration expressed very strongly its opinion that it didn't want to see Ireland adopting that legislation. And of course, we have a very significant multinational sector here, which has made the country very wealthy. And so I think people are beginning to face up to the fact that there may be economic penalties or an economic cost to taking this very pro-Palestinian stance. And that is something I think that has yet to be resolved in our politics and is likely to be a subject for discussion and debate over the coming months.
So I'm assuming that when President Donald Trump made those comments on Tuesday night and suggested that America take control of Gaza and that people who live there be relocated to other places, I'm assuming that generated a lot of headlines in Ireland by virtue of the fact that people have been following this very carefully. Then we've heard the Israeli defense minister saying that countries that oppose Israel's military operation in Gaza should take in the Palestinians. He mentioned Spain, he mentioned Norway, he mentioned Ireland. What do people in Ireland think about that idea?
I mean, I think people in Ireland have become kind of used to those sort of comments from the Israeli government. The Israeli government, in protest at the Irish government's recognition of Palestine and also the occupied territories bill, withdrew its ambassador from Dublin last year. Now, that's something that they haven't done in Norway or in Spain, who are also countries, of course, that have recognized the state of Palestine. I mean, there's no doubt, we've covered it extensively in our paper in the Irish Times, that the current Israeli government regards Ireland as probably the most anti-Israel member of the European Union, and as such has targeted and will target Ireland, particularly with lobbying in the US, and that's where those concerns about the potential economic cost of taking such a pro-Palestinian position have come to the fore here. Reaction from the government to the comments from the Israeli government about taking in those refugees, I think we're to play it down and say that the priority for Ireland remains, ensuring that the ceasefire is sustained, that the hostages are released, and that there's a surge in humanitarian aid to enable the rebuilding of Gaza and the return of refugees there. I suppose, like the rest of the world, the Irish government is waiting to see just how serious Donald Trump is about that proposal.
Yeah, the Israeli foreign minister has labelled Ireland's prime minister anti-Semitic. I'm just wondering whether that damages him politically at a domestic level.
I don't think it damages him at a domestic level. I think, there might be, I think the domestic politics of all this would change if there were to be a significant economic price for the position that this government and the last one are adopting vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine. But for now, it is not causing him any political difficulty. In fact, if there is a political difficulty facing the current government, it's that many people, and certainly the opposition in Parliament, want them to enact that legislation and to be even more pro-Palestinian than they already are.
So everything you've told us so far, I mean, do you think there are many people in Ireland who think perhaps all of this has been mismanaged and perhaps Ireland shouldn't have stuck its neck out to the extent that it has done? Do you think there is a degree of regret about how this is all handled? That's the essence of my question.
I think there probably is, but for now I think it's kind of subterranean. I think it will come to the fore if, as I say, there's a significant economic price. If, for instance, US multinationals, which contribute so much to corporation tax revenues in Ireland, if they were to begin leaving. Now they face, Ireland faces other, dangers with the uncertainty brought around by the Trump administration and his, strongly, America first, economically nationalist policies. He's looking to bring American companies home to the US, and many of those companies are here, but they are here because they want to do business with the rest of the world, because they want to do business with the European Union. Don't think that's likely to change. But you're looking at a situation of grave uncertainty where, the Trump administration isn't directly related to Israel-Palestine, of course, but they're talking about sanctions, or they're talking about tariffs on the EU. Ireland's a member of the EU. So whilst our economic fortunes have been very much on the up for the last number of years, I think people here are very keenly aware of the fact that neither the government nor the country can rely on that obtaining into the future. And if there is an economic shock, of course the politics changes here. Isn't that what happens everywhere?
Yeah, one of the reasons why the Israeli foreign minister singled out Ireland is, of course, because Ireland recognizes a Palestinian state, along with the other countries I mentioned, Spain, Norway, and others. I'm just wondering whether, perhaps Ireland is trying to lobby or persuade other countries to follow in their footsteps so that perhaps Ireland won't be singled out for any punitive measures. I mean, have you heard any such overtures by the political class there?
I think there was certainly significant efforts to persuade other European countries to recognize Palestine last year. I think the former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar's successor, Simon Harris, who's now the Deputy Prime Minister, I think they were very much involved in talking to Spain, talking to Norway, talking to some other EU countries who would largely have historically been seen as being more in the pro-Palestine camp. But I suppose one of the difficulties at EU level is that there's such a divergence of opinions there as well. You've got countries like Ireland and Spain who have very much taken up the Palestinian cause, and you have other countries like Germany and Austria, for various historical reasons, I suppose, that tend to be an awful lot more sensitive to Israel's needs. But yes, is the answer. The short answer to your question. Ireland certainly has been talking to other countries about recognition, but I suppose we're all in a sort of a new context now, and I think the hope in Ireland is that the ceasefire holds, and that the sort of political pungency of this issue is diminished both domestically and internationally.
And just lastly, Pat, I mean, would you say overall this whole issue of the plight of the Palestinians has united the Irish as a people in terms of the collective opinion and the stance that's been taken by the government? Or would you say that it's something that's had the opposite effect and ended up fracturing society and creating fractious debate?
I mean, I don't think it's done either, really. I think it'll be going too far to say that it has united people. There is certainly, I think it's fair to say, fairly broad public and political support for the position of the Palestinians here, and that in international affairs, and that particular aspect of international affairs have become, through the debate over the Occupied Territories Bill that I referred to earlier, have become a part of domestic political debate here. But I think it'll be going too far to say that it's either united or divided the country. It's one more political issue on the domestic agenda.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Pat Leahy, political editor for the Irish Times. Really appreciate it. Meanwhile, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has hit back after a reporter pressed her on President Donald Trump's plans to occupy the Gaza Strip. He also asked if this plan aligned with the America First policies that he spelt out during his re-election campaign. Well, Leavitt swiftly defended President Trump's proposal for the US to own Gaza in the Middle East, but pushed back at journalists who questioned details of the plan. She called it an out-of-the-box idea that would meet the president's goal of lasting peace.
I would reject the premise of your question that this forces the United States to be entangled in conflicts abroad. The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. And let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region. And as I said in my opening remarks, we've had the same people pushing the same solutions to this problem for decades. And it's been made very clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza. It does not mean American taxpayers will be funding this effort. It means Donald Trump, who is the best deal maker on the planet, is going to strike a deal with our partners in the region.
The White House press secretary speaking there. Well, for more analysis, we can speak to Mercedes Schlapp, former senior White House advisor for strategic communications under President Donald Trump during his first term. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I should add, you also worked on the Trump 2020 re-election campaign as a senior advisor. This idea that President Trump put out on Tuesday night with regards to Gaza has created a frenzy of headlines right across the world, lots of discussion. How carefully considered do you think this idea really was?
Look, in knowing how President Trump thinks, he is one who exchanges a lot of ideas with his advisors, and in probably saying, okay, we know Benjamin Netanyahu is coming, the prime minister of Israel. We know at this point that this ceasefire is in a very fragile state. We need to get it to a point where the ceasefire can really stick. And we need to ensure that the Arab nations also play a role in ensuring that that figuring out what the future solutions are for Gaza. As we know, it's been significantly demolished and bombed during this period of time. It's been under the control of the terrorist Hamas, who obviously have oppressed their own Palestinian people and have targeted the Israeli citizens. And so I think for President Trump, he's big into the shock and awe, and he wants to put it out there to be like, well, how are we going to rebuild this? How is this going to go? And of course, it causes huge fury, whether it be from the Democrat Party, from the media, obviously from other global partners, in trying to decipher what President Trump really is trying to accomplish here. And I think the goal is to ensure that the Arab nations know that they have a role to play in rebuilding Gaza. They have a role to play, as we know, Egypt and Jordan, in taking in Palestinian refugees and figuring out a path forward where you don't allow these terrorists like Hamas to be in charge of that region.
Yeah, but countries like Egypt and Jordan that have already got large numbers of Palestinian refugees dating back to 1948 when the State of Israel was established, why should they have to carry the burden? That's the question they're asking. And if President Trump wanted them...
And why should any of these countries carry the burden?
Right, why can't they stay in Gaza, which is where they've lived for generations, where their ancestors are buried?
Right, but you have to rebuild that infrastructure in Gaza. You have to make sure, as you know, the unemployment rate amongst Palestinian youth is skyrocketing. It's figuring out how can you rebuild it to a point that it is an ability of a livable conditions in that area. So it does raise a lot of these questions. And the question is, who will carry the burden? How is it going to be handled? Is it something that's going to be a multinational approach? Is it something like the Marshall Plan? These are all things that should be discussed at this point in time. And it's why you've seen President Trump talk about this out of the box thinking. Look, it was President Trump who brought the Abraham Accords during a period of time where there was peace in the Middle East and where they were trying to isolate Iran, because as we know, has been sponsoring terrorism with Hamas and Hezbollah for quite some time in the Middle East region.
But it does seem, doesn't it, when we've heard, Marco Rubio saying, the US Secretary of State, the new US Secretary of State, I'm saying that for the benefit of our viewers because he's only been in office for a couple of weeks. He's been saying something quite different. It sounds like this is a temporary solution. People can go and live in another country and then come back to a reconstructed Gaza. I mean, it makes us in the outside of Washington think this is all a little bit improvised and people are sort of feeling their way in the dark, putting out ideas that haven't really been carefully thought through.
Well, I think the way President Trump works is that when he's talking to his different advisors, they are coming up with different types of ideas. From that, then you have to go from the idea to the actual planning of it. Obviously, there's so many components to this. You saw Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Rand Paul, two what I would call, I would say Lindsey Graham being hawkish, Rand Paul being a little more isolationist, basically not happy with President Trump and his comments on Gaza, saying, wait a second here, let's not move too quickly. It's got to be about America first. What does this all mean? But bringing it into the discussion, I think, is critical, because the reality is, what is it going to take to rebuild Gaza? How are we going to ensure that the ceasefire sticks? How can we ensure that, as they've talked about, that this could be a 10, I would say 15, 20-year process of rebuilding, if that, and who's going to be involved in the rebuilding process, right? These were conversations that were had back after World War II with the Marshall Plan and rebuilding Europe. What is this approach going to take? And I think Donald Trump is one, and we saw this in the case of Greenland, in the case of Panama Canal, where he's putting out an idea. It might be something that will cause wait a second, this is not how business is usually done in the world or in America. And then all of a sudden is figuring out, how do you get to a point where people, it raises awareness to the situation at hand. You take the case of Greenland, for example,
sure,
where President Trump has raised the issue of national security and what it means to be able to invest in that region. Or the Panama Canal, where you've seen the Chinese, basically investing infrastructure with their own initiatives. And now the Panamanian president, after Secretary Marco Rubio visited the region, decided, you know what, we're gonna not renew these ties with the Chinese government in their Belt Road Initiative. And so this is where you're going to see some transformational changes from a diplomatic effort coming out of the United States. And so I think with the Gaza question, it really, I think, woke people up to say, well, what are we going to do in the region? What does this mean? How do we establish an area that could be a place that could, for people to go back to their country if they want to?
Well, he's certainly got us talking about it, so indeed, it's having the desired effect if that's the strategy. I just want to ask you about your time working in the White House as a strategic comms advisor to President Trump during his first time. I mean, did you sometimes find yourself in a situation where President Trump had gone off script and had taken everyone, including you, by surprise, and you perhaps had to take him to one side and have a little bit of a chat with him to find out what's going on?
Well, I think the key is that one thing with President Trump is that when you were finished working, and it was obviously late nights, early mornings, and then he would put out a tweet at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Back then it was Twitter, now it's X. You really would wake up the next morning, we'd all huddle in the press office and be like, okay, how are we going to answer this? Like, we weren't maybe necessarily like, it would be one of those where we'd be like, we need to get in touch with the president to get his thinking behind a particular tweet or a particular post. And I think it's important to understand, like, he is the communicator in chief. He is the one driving the agenda. And I think this is happening even more so now in the second administration. Look, one thing I admired about President Trump is that we would all go into the Oval Office. It was cabinet members to staffers involved there, senior advisors. He would ask us all what were our opinions on a particular topic. And, there were times where he would maybe disagree with a cabinet member, but would agree with something I would say, or disagree with me and agree with the cabinet member. This is his style of management. He wants to get as much input as possible. He wants people to kind of fight it out. And I say fight it out in the friendliest, most respectful of terms, where there would be very constructive debates within the Oval Office. And then from there, he would be the ultimate decision maker. And so I felt that we were very much listened to as staffers. I might disagree with him on how he might have handled one tweet or another tweet, but for me, it was a matter of the president being able to deliver his message, and our goal, obviously, to support the president's agenda. And yes, of course, I would be open to advising him if I felt like this is what we're going to get out of this particular policy decision, or these are the pitfalls and these are the advantages. And that's my job as an advisor, which is to basically help the president understand where the pitfalls are, where the advantages are, and how to best communicate that message.
Were there ever times where you lost your temper or lost patience and perhaps expressed it to him? And I wonder how he responds in a situation like that.
No, I've got 5 children. So in my household, you learn what it is to negotiate. You learn how to be a deal maker. You try never to lose your patience, although I've lost it plenty of times. And, no, I felt with President Trump, I didn't really ever felt I lost my patience with him. I actually loved working with him. He was my favorite boss. I learned so much from working at the White House. I was very humbled and honored to be part of his White House team. And I always just felt very much listened to. And he might not agree with me 100%, but that's, my job as a senior advisor is to give the best advice to the President of the United States, and he will make the ultimate decision, and respect him in the process.
Yeah, you worked in the administration of George W. Bush as well, I understand. Right. And one of the things you're quoted as having said is the big difference between working with President Trump and working with President George W. Bush was the late night tweets, as you mentioned there. I'm just wondering, of course, this is a new administration from the one that you worked in a few years ago. And I'm just wondering whether you think, looking at it from the outside in, whether President Trump has got the right people in his inner sanctum to give him those well-considered opinions that you say you and the people were giving him in the first term. Do you think he's got the team right?
Yeah, I would say one of the lessons he learned was that staffing was critical for his success. I think he picked certain chiefs of staffs at the beginning of his first term that really didn't understand how Donald Trump functioned and really tried to say, well, wait a second, he's not making the right decision, so I, as chief of staff, should be making the right decision. And wait a second, your chief of staff you're not the elected official. The American people elected President Trump. They didn't elect the chief of staff. He also picked some cabinet members the first term where obviously they were more concerned about their own agenda than pushing the president's agenda. And I think that President Trump knew at this point he was not going to make that same mistake again. And I think that's why he's put critical people, very, I would say, first of all, strong communicators, people who understand policy, and obviously his inner circle. Some of the staffers like Dan Scavino and Stephen Miller, two very good friends of mine, in that inner circle, people have been with President Trump. Susie Wiles has been with President Trump since the election, and really just, I think, a very smart leader and able to build a very strong team. And so I really like what I'm seeing so far. I like the fact that they're moving fast. I like the fact that they understand what it takes to be organized and get the work done from the executive branch. And then obviously they're, and not only doing domestic policy, but also doing foreign policy, where you have our secretaries, the cabinet members traveling across the globe. I mean, you have Secretary Marco Rubio down in Latin America, an area that's been pretty much ignored by the Biden administration. You had special envoy for special missions, Rick Grinnell, who went down to Venezuela and negotiated the release of the 6 Americans in Venezuela. You have the fact that you've got the special envoy for the Middle East going and working with Israel to get the ceasefire done. So I feel like it is running on all cylinders. It's functioning in a way that things are getting done. Obviously, I think one of the next big steps is going to be President Trump meeting with the Republican members of Congress to decide what the budget plan is going to look like, how they're going to build that out, because you've got the Senate trying to push 2 bills. You've got the House of Representatives trying to push one big, beautiful bill, as President Trump has called. And they're having that infighting right now of what can deliver quicker results in getting President Trump's mandate, America First mandate, funded quickly.
Sure. Well, they've certainly hit the ground running. Just lastly, I want to ask you, again, casting your mind back some time, particularly to 2015, when it's reported, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but it's reported that, you weren't perhaps a huge fan of President Trump, Donald Trump as he was then, before he was president. What won you over? Because you did criticize him on 1 or 2 occasions, and then you became obviously someone who was very much part of the inner circle. And I just wondered what it was that made you sort of essentially throw your support behind him.
Well, as part of the media, I hope my job is to criticize as many Republican politicians as I possibly can, and then also criticize Democrat politicians as well, right? It's our job to be critical. It's our job to be analytical. It's our job to say, how can you be a better candidate? And in essence, it was really I would say my husband, Matt Schlapp, chairman of the CPAC of American Conservative Union. We run the largest conservative summit across the globe. He had met with Donald Trump in 2015, and he was so impressed with him. And he basically said that Donald Trump, and predicted that Donald Trump would win the primary, that he was coming in with this very effective messaging to the working class, to the American people, and that there was something about him that was just different than any other politician that that my husband Matt had dealt with. Now, I had not met President Trump. It was actually we didn't endorse during the primary. I was highly critical of the different candidates in place. But as I got to know him, it was during the CPAC event. And as I got to really learn his message, and I saw one thing that I didn't see from other politicians, and that's that he listened to the American people. He was always asking questions. He was always trying to figure out, how can we make things better? He worked more as like an executive than he did as just a politician that simply talks your ear off and tells you what you should think or what you should believe. And so I would really love that. And then when I was given the opportunity, I got a phone call from Ivanka Trump to see if I would come join the team. Obviously, we joined in to help him get elected during the 2016 election, and then joined the team and got to work with him firsthand. I was very impressed with his management skills. I loved how he incorporated so many women into his administration and listened to us when we were basically asked, our opinion about one policy or the other, and how he was able to deliver so much during the first term, considering the fact that he had the FBI trying to take him out, and which I think caused a huge problem with the whole Russian hoax. And then following that, then you have the Democrats basically trying to put the man in jail after, impeaching him. It is just gross to see what the left has done to try to destroy Donald Trump. And yet you see a man who's victorious, a man who survived 2 assassination attempts, and a man who I think has really done so much to rebuild and will do so much to rebuild America. Because as we know, we've had a president for the past 4.5 years that the media didn't even question his mental capabilities. And President Biden did barely anything during those 4 years to strengthen America. So I think it's great to see how President Trump has really grown in the job and how he's now just executing and getting the work done and knowing that there's limited time to do so.
Wow, we've got so much more I wanted to talk to you about, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Please do come and talk to us again. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Mercedes Schlapp, thank you very much indeed for your time today. In other news, it's been announced that the funeral of the billionaire philanthropist and spiritual leader, the Aga Khan, who died this week at the age of 88, will take place on Saturday. Well, Prince Karim Aga Khan was the 49th hereditary imam of the Ismaili Muslims. Well, he passed away peacefully in Lisbon, Portugal. Well, through his charity, the Aga Khan Development Network, he was able to help people and causes right across the globe. Well, he became a leading owner and breeder of racehorses. Well, the prince had an estimated fortune of around $1 billion. That's according to a report by Forbes back in 2008. Meanwhile, King Charles III, the reigning monarch of the United Kingdom, is understood to be deeply saddened by the death of the philanthropist, who was a friend both to himself and his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Well, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres described him as a symbol of peace, tolerance and compassion in our troubled world. Meanwhile, the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has paid tribute to the prince, describing him as a man of faith, vision and generosity and a remarkable leader. Well, Prince Rahim Al Hosseini has been named as the new Aga Khan, spiritual leader of millions of Shia Ismaili Muslims around the world. He'll take on that role from his father. Well, for more, we can speak now to Lord Sarfaz, a philanthropist and member of the British House of Lords. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. It's been announced that the Aga Khan's funeral will take place in Lisbon on Saturday. And just before we crossed you, I was reading a tribute to the Aga Khan that you yourself wrote. You described him as having been a hero of yours, and I was wondering why that was.
Well, I've been a huge admirer of his work for many, many years. I mean, what is there not to admire? He was one of the greatest statesmen of our time. Yet he had no state. He had no land, no government, no army. Yet he had this incredible influence and goodwill all around the world. He was a master diplomat, built up relationships with heads of state, heads of government, with our own king. He'd be as comfortable in the White House as he would in a village in the Himalayas with a member of his community. And he built this incredible development network, which is unlike any other international organization and benefits millions of people every single day, not from within his community, but everyone now across the developing world. And the sort of things that they deliver, hospitals, schools, microfinance programs, universities, these are world class. So they're not sort of low budget projects in developing countries. These are world class institutions offered to those who need them most. And some of these hospitals and universities are much better than you'd find in many developed countries. And so what is there not to admire about a lifetime, almost 70 years of nothing but service?
Indeed, Lord Sarfaz, and that's, one of the reasons perhaps why world leaders have been paying tribute to him. We've heard the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres calling him a symbol of peace, tolerance and compassion in our troubled world. Then we've had the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calling him not just a very good friend, but an extraordinarily compassionate global leader. I mean, it's no exaggeration, is it, to say that he himself was a global leader and a world leader. That's what you've been saying. Some also go a bit further. They say he was the builder of bridges. What do you think they mean by that?
Well, I think he took his responsibilities and his influence very seriously. And he stayed clear of lots of geopolitical debates. He stayed clear of theological debates. He sat above that. And what he's left behind is his community. And if you take a look at that community, wherever in the world they are, and there are about 15 million Ismailis spread all over the world, these are vibrant, successful, generous people. You just have to visit Houston, Texas, to see the amazing things that Ismailis are doing, or just go to King's Cross. And what you won't find is an Ismaili extremist or terrorist or an Ismaili beggar. Crime is disproportionately low in his community. Women in his community hold the exact same leadership positions that men do. There is no differentiation whatsoever. And from what I know of many Ismailis, is that in his community, the concept of service was a privilege. You had to earn the right to serve. People would line up physically in order to serve, whether that's to provide humanitarian assistance at a disaster site or donate their time or money. They had to earn it. And then in some community centers, they'd be giving a badge which said, work, no words.
Indeed, it's interesting because he told Vanity Fair magazine in 2012, quote, the Islamic ethic is that God has given you the capacity or the good fortune to be a privileged individual in society. You have a moral responsibility to society. But what do you think he made of the modern world?
Well, I mean, he was incredible. Over his tenure as the Aga Khan, the world saw lots and lots of changes. In one interview not so long ago, he was asked what changed about him and his beliefs and his values through that time. And he said absolutely nothing. He stayed firm to his traditions and his values, but was able to very easily go in and out of the Western world and circles of influence and power, and very traditional things in his community, and stayed firm to the history of his community. He was big on preservation of historic places as well. And he was a big patron of the arts and culture. There are dozens of monuments around the world which have nothing to do with him, that he preserved. He discovered Sardinia and put it on the map, working with local fishermen many decades ago, and turned it into the tourist destination it is today. He planted millions and millions of trees. He transformed the worlds of horsing, boating, skiing. He had profound, lasting impact globally. There are very few people that have done all of these things and managed to stay clear of any major controversy. He wasn't a prolific tweeter or social media user. He was visible when he needed to be. He was visible in the right places. He did a lot of his engagement privately. He was effective, and it's a masterclass in how to be a leader.
Yeah, I mean, he lived a glamorous life as well. I mean, having seen him from afar, I mean, he was a figure of great elegance and much respected. He lived in Lisbon. He also lived in France, Switzerland. He was a British citizen. I mean, a really international life. You described him as having had a multicultural fluency. And I'm just wondering where you think he thought he was from.
Well, I think he wouldn't identify with any one country as much as he would with his global community. And, we talk a lot about immigration these days in politics in the West. And his followers are all over the world. And so he had to be all over the world. But when he went to these countries and he spoke to them, he told them to be loyal, patriotic in the countries that they live, and engaged in those countries. And that's why you see community leaders in the countries that Ismailis live all over the world coming up organically. And in a world where people question immigration, any country in the world would love to have Ismaili immigrants because they are the very best. They're net positive contributors everywhere they are.
And it seems the tradition is going to continue. The Aga Khan's son, 53-year-old Rahim al-Husseini, is going to succeed him. That does mean continuity, doesn't it, for this institution?
Yes, you would have seen that overnight, Ismailis will immediately pledge their allegiance to the new Aga Khan, Prince Rahim, because it was not the late Aga Khan as an individual role model so much as the values that he represented. And Prince Rahim has been fortunate to witness and be with his father and be engaged in the Aga Khan development network. He's fully prepared to take this on, more so than his father was, who took it on at a much earlier age. But the transition will be seamless. There's no succession controversy whatsoever, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. You don't see it much anywhere in the world. You certainly don't see it in politics.
Yeah, I once saw the Aga Khan at the ARC races in Paris, and I think it's very difficult to think of the Aga Khan without thinking of horses. I mean, thoroughbred racing, breeding, perhaps his greatest passions after the causes that he championed. Fair to say?
Absolutely. He was passionate, and whatever he did in his life, the passions that he pursued them at scale and with great impact. And he made a mark on all of these areas. I mean, he was an Olympic skier in his early days. That was a passion. Boating was a passion. And so that passion, I think you'll see in his community as well. He demonstrated that you can get to the top of whatever career or profession that you want to. And this is what he kept telling them from what I know. I'm not an Ismaili, but he told them to be passionate, to work hard, and to stay clear of all of the sort of controversy. There was an incident in which some of his community members were attacked, and many lost their lives in that attack. But he instructed his followers not to go onto social media, not to protest, no aggression, no retaliation. He was a peacemaker, and you don't see that at all in the modern day anywhere.
Just lastly, and very briefly, if you will, some describe him as a business magnate. He was, of course, a billionaire. He was a philanthropist, a spiritual man, a regal icon. Which label, of all of the many labels that are attached to the late Aga Khan, which one do you think is the most apt?
I think all of the above for sure, and to be any of those is very, very difficult. To be the majority shareholder in the businesses that he operated, these are sort of big energy companies, financial institutions in challenging parts of the world, hotels. You can go across Africa and Asia and stay in some of the finest hotels in the world that he developed. He was able to do all of this, but I think in his heart of hearts, he was the Ismaili Imam. He was the spiritual leader of the Ismailis. And I think everything else was secondary.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Lord Sarfaz, philanthropist, a member of the British House of Lords. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.